Hello, and welcome to Cookie Pocket, an attempt at a podcast, episode 7. Hosted by me. And we have Christian and Zach, as per usual.
Yep.
Hello.
So,
We're
the
here.
final countdown. Will you let me talk, Zach?
Oh, yes, of course. Many parts.
Okay, the final countdown was released in 1980. It was directed by Don Taylor, and it is we don't even know what it is. It's a Twilight Zone episode, but it's sci-fi historical drama, I guess, about the USS Nimitz, which is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that finds itself and its crew stuck in the Pacific on December 6th, 1941, with the capabilities to prevent the attack on Pearl Harbor the day after. It stars Kirk Douglas as captain and commanding officer, Martin Sheen as Warren Lasky, who's a systems analyst and civilian observer for the Department of Defense, Catherine Ross as Laurel, James Ferrantino as Air Group Commander Owens, Ron O'Neill as Dan Thurman, who's the XO, the executive officer, Charles Durning as Senator Samuel Chapman, and Charlie the dog as himself. So, either of you can go first concerning your overall impressions of this film.
Well, Christian, do you want to go first? Or
Sure, why not? Let's rip the Band-Aid off, shall we?
Yeah.
I'm afraid of the reputation I'm giving myself with these ratings. Before I say anything, as I was watching the movie and realizing what I thought of it, in my head I was like, oh god, this is going to be so much harder than giving one of Zach's films a 1 out of 5. Because I can just fight with Zach all day, and Zach hates Star Wars, so I can hate his things, and it's okay. And I honestly had that conversation in my head, and I was like, I need to be honest about how I feel about the film, even if it's completely contradictory to how a good friend feels about it. So, yeah. All that being said, I gave it a 1 out of 5. I really did not. I was not entertained. I was bored. I'm sorry, but I probably enjoyed The Changeling more, honestly. It was rough for me. I felt like it was just like 80 minutes of conversation and like 10 minutes of some interesting plain stuff. And right when this plot of sorts is kind of like reaching a point where they might actually take part in this historical turning point and change the course of history, oh no, we time travel back to the beginning and nothing happens and the movie's over. It's right when I was starting to care a little bit, I felt like the rug was swept out from under me. And the last thing I'll say is, this is just a personal thing and not necessarily a critical point, but I find Kirk Douglas really annoying for some reason. Like I just find his face extremely annoying. And I know that's completely unfair.
Oh my god.
And not objective.
Wow.
And not even like taking into account any like allegations or personal things, but I just find him annoying for some reason, whatever that may be. So I'm sorry for the harsh reality, but that's kind of how I felt about the film.
all right. Well, I definitely didn't seem to dislike it as much as Christian did, but I was also not a massive fan of this movie. I think that it has a lot of interesting ideas, and it's a story with a lot of potential. Like you said in the introduction, Mitchell, this sounds like a great concept for a Twilight Zone episode, and I know that because Twilight Zone did an episode like this where a plane gets shot back into the past. But I feel like they don't really do anything with those interesting ideas. They talk about those interesting ideas, and characters bring up some interesting points, but there's really no payoff to those interesting points at any point. At points, I'm saying points a lot, it seems at times as if those ideas are going to pay off, and it seems like we're headed towards maybe some kind of a big conflict that'll take those ideas into play. But then those potential threats tend to get squashed almost as soon as they start to kind of take off, meaning that for a vast majority of the movie, our characters just kind of sit and talk in the middle of the ocean, and then they go home. So personally, I was not especially impressed with it, and I gave it a 2 out of 5. Although I will say I don't seem to dislike Kirk Douglas as much as Christian does, But I will say, setting aside any alleged scummy things that he may or may not have done, I think that he was a good actor when he was back in his prime. But this movie, I think he's far past his prime, and also doesn't have an especially interesting character to play, which is maybe why he doesn't kind of capture the audience as much as he would in one of his earlier films. But yeah,
Right. And on Kirk Douglas, I've seen Paths of Glory, which is, I mean, that's prime. That's literally Spartacus and Paths of Glory.
And those are
Stanley
Kubrick,
Kubrick.
so.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. And 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea also. That's Richard Fleischer.
Oh, yeah.
That Disney film. But yeah, that was certainly his prime. I completely agree with that. Interestingly enough, he was in the Navy in World War II, so this is kind of be something he should be able to slip into really easily. But I guess the character that they wrote for him, or you know, I guess they really had very little to write for him. They probably just told him just to be like how you were 40 years ago, I guess. But yeah, I respect both your opinions, and I mostly agree with what you all said, and your impressions are definitely respectable. But I would say that this movie was created for a certain audience, especially in 1980.
Sure.
The time that it was released, and having this cast, including Martin Sheen, obviously, he was just in Apocalypse Now. Yeah, having all of that together, and the biggest thing for this movie that sets it apart from others is that the Navy heavily supported this movie with resources and budget, and they gave them 48 Navy personnel to actually use. They used the actual USS Nimitz, which I think is like the longest commissioned ship in the Navy, I think, or something like that.
Wow.
All the planes they used were real. All of the practical effects and all of the actual, like the dogfighting sequences, they were all flown by professional pilots. The Zeros weren't actual Zeros; they were A6 Texans.
Yeah.
They were T6 Texans, right? From the 70s. Those are American planes that they redesigned to look like Zeros.
Yeah.
But the in terms of the practical effects, I think they did an amazing job. They really took advantage of their budget. I think it was $15 million at the time, and they had a lot of support from the Navy, and so much support, in fact, that they used the movie poster in recruitment offices for the Navy.
Oh.
And the USS Nimitz in real life, they have this thing called it's called a breakaway music. So when they do like the all hands man your battle stations thing. In real life, they usually play music during that time, and now they play the final countdown theme on the USS Nimitz for that. So that's kind of funny.
Okay. That's fun.
So yeah, and then obviously Europe was inspired by the movie to write their song, "The Final Countdown" in 1986. So yeah, I mean this was supposed to be released like a summer blockbuster, kind of like it was actually moderately successful in the box offices, but. Yeah, I think having Kirk Douglas in it is fine. I don't think that really detracted too much from the overall quality. Martin Sheen, I think, acting as a philosopher and kind of like the acting beyond kind of like a civilian observer thing, kind of giving a civilian perspective versus like taking on like the Navy mentality, like we have to fight in the past, present, and future. I personally thought that was interesting. A lot of their dialogue is kind of hard to pick up on and also very hard to pay attention to the first time around, but after seeing this like 4 times now, and I've finally seen like the nuanced things earlier, like they have Mr. Tideman, who actually develop the ship and stuff in the very beginning, and Lasky, Martin Sheen, is like waving and like, okay, he's my boss, I don't know who he is. And the interesting thing about that, this is kind of going beyond my overall impression now, but the interesting thing about that is that they went so far to have that surprise, not really like kind of like a twist, but more just like a big surprise at the end, like, oh, Mr. Tideman is Commander Owens. The interesting thing about that is that they had to make so many plot holes to get that to happen. And I'm kind of using that. I'm going to use that not only like to play devil's advocate, but also to say that a lot of this movie's plot is not meant to be looked into so much. I'm not going to say that they didn't put so much time into developing the plot, but I will say that it's more of a popcorn movie than anything else. Like 1/3 of the movie, like realistically, over 1/3 of the movie is like seeing the Tomcats fly around and stuff. and the helicopters and seeing the surveillance plane fly over and just seeing different plane stuff. And, that's really what it is. I mean, it's like a military, if you're into military stuff and you're into military hardware, whether you're like, a lot about it or like you're a kid, that's the target audience. For a lot of this movie, that's the target audience. And if you don't care about that stuff, then that definitely hurts your overall impression no matter what, because they shove it in your face really hard. Sure. And even for 1980, like the average audience member would not totally understand everything. But I like the Senator Chapman thing. Him being really aggressive. There's diverse personalities. I mean, you have Chapman being really aggressive. You have like, I should say that Laurel kind of fits like the archetype of I'm trying to be a feminist in 1940 and it's not working. And Owens is like, hey, that's cute. I thought that was kind of funny. I mean, that was definitely cookie cutter romance right there. But once again, yes. I mean, that's not really the point of the movie. The point of the movie is to watch the planes. So stuff like that. But yeah, the reason why I gave this movie a 3 out of 5 is because it kind of inherits its own personality. I don't think it relies too much on breaking traditional movie, the structure by. I don't think they go too far with showing a lot of the military hardware stuff because it's kind of the point of the movie. It's kind of a part of it, and the sci-fi element is not very emphasized too much, and there's plenty of plot holes in it. But when you really kind of just take the main themes that Martin Sheen's character particularly was kind of putting home, like, are you really supposed to mess with history? And then at the very end, Yellen's like, oh, well, we have to take the ship, we have to take the planes back. We clearly nature doesn't want us to attack them, so we're not going to. And whether or not that was worth it is kind of the viewer's perspective. I think they kind of. They could have. Well, I shouldn't say they could have very easily could have just gone after the Japanese fleet and won, because they could have done that. But I mean, they have economical limitations and things like that doing that, and it doesn't fit the overall themes of the story. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, I mean these are not super complicated themes. Like the more they have different. The characters have different perspectives on it, and it's really just about what would you do in that time period if this happened, and how would you react? And they give a few different perspectives, and they take on one of them. Then they decide to go all out Navy and decide to go after him, but then nature's like, no, we're going to take you back because that's how nature is. That's the natural order of things dominates everything. Mm-hmm. And Owens takes advantage of that. As you can see, he's like this, this big rich guy who, took advantage of the world over time and, married Laurel, and now they have their dog. So, yes, 3 out of 5 for my overall perspective. Is there anything that annoyed you guys, like, to no end, that really made you give it a 1 out of 5 or 2 out of 5? Like, something that was, like, besides Kirk Douglas's face, that really bothered you?
Well, there were a couple things. But the main thing was, I feel like there's no major conflict in this movie. I wrote it down. I kept thinking, like, oh, this is where we're going to get into the action. Because you mentioned kind of the point of this movie is to show off the planes and the naval flight procedure. But a vast majority of this movie, the planes aren't even in the air or not doing anything exciting. They're just kind of parking and maneuvering on the aircraft carrier, which is maybe really exciting if you're a naval nut or a military nut, but I am not. So I was like, why am I watching a plane parking for 5 minutes? And I kept thinking it was going to get exciting and action-packed. So when the dogfight happened, I thought, oh, okay, this is where we get exciting. And then the dogfight ends. And then later in the movie, they capture a Japanese pilot. And I thought, and he kind of takes a hostage and he's got control of this one room. And I thought, okay, maybe he's going to call some more Japanese soldiers to the ship and they're going to take it over. And then the crew's going to have to take the ship back.
Right.
And then that Japanese pilot gets shot. And that doesn't happen. And then later, the captain, Kirk Douglas, decides, okay, we're gonna stop Pearl Harbor. We're gonna win. And then the time storm appears again. And instead of trying to fight it, they try to turn, it follows them, and he goes, well, we tried, and then they all go home. Like, I feel like
Right.
there's no major conflict. The movie keeps suggesting things that could be big, exciting conflicts and then swatting them away immediately. That really frustrated me because I
Hmm.
saw like multiple opportunities to make this an exciting, interesting time travel movie, and then they just went nah to every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I do. It's not like I don't disagree, but the thing is that I knew exactly what to expect coming into this. That's why I'm saying, like, if you see it multiple times, it kind of makes a lot more sense. And
Yeah.
and when you're watching it expecting action and thinking, and the movie kind of, I will say, I'm not going to say the term that people use for when you're being dissatisfied by something that's obviously being shoved in your face, that it looks like about to happen but doesn't in the end. um, I guess the story, the
I
official
don't.
literary term would be red herring, I guess.
Mm.
Oh
Okay.
well.
But but yeah,
But usually
yeah.
when
No,
there are red
I
herrings, usually if there are
it's
red herrings, there's an actual murderer.
Yeah.
right.
This movie is just nothing but red herrings, and there's no murderer.
Right. And I think the movie knows that. The movie knows that it's doing that, and it tries to get entertainment value out of it and tries to get you to be, it's a drama. It's a historical drama, not a like a war movie, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I hesitated to call it a war movie, because I've seen some people call it that, but it very obviously isn't, because
Mm-hmm.
there's very little war. All the war is only
Mm-hmm.
being discussed. But it basically, even if you didn't know what happened at Pearl Harbor, they still shove it in your face a million times. Which
Yeah.
Christian, I bet Christian did not like that, according to his Twitter review. But the movie gives you everything to think about and nothing to satisfy you as a result. It kind of is supposed to give you things to think about,
Mm-hmm.
and it's difficult to do that when it's a popcorn movie, because you're not supposed to be thinking, and the movie's telling you to think. But that's what I mean. Like, this is it's a very targeted audience type thing. Like, you have to know how much you have to care about the movie before you even watch it, and that's a problem. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm saying
Okay.
that's a bad thing.
All right.
But
Yeah.
that is the nature of the beast.
Just to cut in real quick, I would say I agree. I totally agree with Zach on the whole like there's conflict and then it's gone thing. But something that I noticed towards the beginning and that was kind of carried on throughout the rest of the movie was, and we kind of talked about this with A New Hope when I asked Zach to talk about sound, and he said that you're more likely to stay engaged with something that has an iffy picture but good sound sometimes than you are to stay engaged with something that has an okay picture but terrible sound,
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
example. And was just I thought the visuals were interesting. Like obviously the aircraft carrier is really cool and the planes are cool and whatever, but I just felt like the sound. A lot of times there was like nothing to listen to, and there's like nothing going on around you except what the characters were saying, and it just felt like there was a lot of dead air a lot of the time
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
on an aircraft carrier that feels like it maybe should have been like more bustling or just generally more things happening around you, but a lot of the time it just felt like it kind of fell flat because all you heard were the characters that were talking. So that's a more technical thing that bothered me, I guess.
I understand that too, and the targeted audience would argue and say that the jet engines are already enough,
Fair enough.
because well, yes, but and then obviously the cannons firing off and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the jet engine sounds. I think it was during when the just after the Zeros strafed the yacht.
Mm-hmm.
It was like one of them was the director's wife or somebody, or I think it was the pilot of the jet's wife. They incorporated her screaming into the jet sound.
Oh.
But as I'm telling you that, you wouldn't know that. I mean, and you
Mm-hmm.
especially you wouldn't notice if you weren't anything, wouldn't know what a jet's supposed to sound like and things like that. And
Right.
there's a lot of nuanced stuff in here that you'd really have to know certain things to be more interested in it. And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Christian mentioned that could be one of the hindrances, and I would agree. I mean, when we're looking at this critically and we're trying to go for the average audience member, I would say that is definitely a valid criticism. But yeah, no, there is dead air, and if you're not interested in the dialogue, then you're basically screwed. Like you're not going to be if you're not interested in the dialogue, then there's no point to be watching. There's no point to be watching a lot of the movie. And honestly, a
Yeah.
lot of it is carried by Martin Sheen and Kirk Douglas.
Since we since we mentioned sound, I did want to bring up, although I think a lot of the sound in this film is kind of unremarkable, I think some of the best sequences in the movie for sound are when they're going through the time storm. I kind of love the time design, the sound design in the time storm. How it sounds at least like it's layered, like manipulated sounds of people screaming and wind added to it. I really like that. So that's one sound strength for the movie, I'd say.
I second that.
Yeah. What were your guys' favorite scenes, or favorite scene of the entire movie?
I'll go first to give Zach a second to think.
Okay.
The time storms were cool, but I guess my favorite scene would be when it's like when we basically meet Laurel on the yacht. Laurel's the only character. I know, but she's literally the only character that I cared about the entire time. Honestly,
Really?
She was the only one that I found all that interesting, and it was a mixture of sort of depressing and impressive to hear her, like the second she walks off screen, the two guys turn to each other and they're like, "So, have you slept with her yet?" And it's just like, "Oh, jeez."
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
yeah, that was.
and so that was like an eye roll moment. But I mean, then you get her like working on the senator's stuff, and then she like acknowledges that there's this vein of sexism going on here, but uses it as like a means of emphasizing the quality of her work and how dedicated she is to public service, which to me is really cool. And that was an exchange that I found interesting and made me actually care about her character throughout the rest of the movie. And I didn't really get any of that with the other characters. And the senator was just kind of shouty. And you guys already know what I think about Kirk Douglas. So that was another drawback for me. But I thought Laurel was an interesting character, and that role was performed well. So
I would definitely agree with that. I definitely like what's her name, Catherine
Ross.
Catherine Ross. Catherine Ross is married to Sam Elliott in real life.
She is,
Wow.
yeah.
Which is really funny. That's Ron from Parks and Rec, if you don't know, Christian. The other Ron.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
He's like a bit character who shows up who's almost identical to Ron, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, except and then he ends up being the opposite because he's like vegan and stuff.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I not to cut you off from your opinion, Zach, but of your best scene. But I was that reminded me that a lot of the side things going on are also kind of keep interest. Like in the beginning, they mention very briefly, like seconds. Like you probably didn't even notice it, but they're talking about the ship being in steady contact with a Russian trawler, and a Russian trawler is a spy ship.
Yeah.
So, and then right after they come back, they go back to those very same sailors, and they're like, "Oh crap! There's no spy ship anymore." And then that's when Kirk Douglas is like, "Let's go general quarters and get ready for attack and stuff like that." So there's tiny stuff like that, and Jack Benning on the radio, that was kind of funny. The radio thing, a low frequency stuff. I think that the general build up as they're realizing that they're in the past, and then Yelland is trying to figure out what's going on, but he kind of keeps wavering back and forth. He's not really sure whether it's some type of like weird facade that the Russians are making, or it's an actual real thing. And I overall I really like that whole sequence. I would say that's like my favorite underrated sequence of the film. But Zach, go ahead.
Well, I had not really even thought about the introduction of Catherine Ross's character, but that is a scene that stands out as good. Although I think over a majority of the film, Catherine Ross is kind of wasted, because I like her as an actress a lot. She's great in the Stepford Wives, but I don't think she's used that well in this movie. But if I had to point out a scene that I think would probably be my favorite, it would maybe be when the yacht is shot down, just because the director of this film, Don Taylor, kind of had a reputation as being a workman-like director who shot things so that they were in the frame and got the movie done as quickly as possible. And you can kind of see that in a lot of the other movies that he made during his career. But I think all of his movies have like one or two scenes in them that are actually filmed in a kind of interesting way or a kind of daring way. And I think a lot of the shots with sort of the camera strapped to the wings of the planes as they swoop down in that scene really work and give it kind of a more dynamic feel that the rest of the movie kind of lacks. So that'd probably be my favorite scene.
Yeah, and it's funny. One of the sequences, one of the Tomcats was lifting off from one of the from the carrier. I have a lot of coffee, that's why I'm jittery right now. But when the Tomcat was leaving the carrier, the afterburn, I think blew up or something. One of it knocked over and like destroyed one of the cameras. So they had to
I read
use
about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they had to use
it
one
sent
of the
crew sprawling down the carrier. Apparently, yeah.
Yeah, and they had to use like a different shot of that. But I thought that was interesting. And I will say, as a good reference for practical effects, The Thing, it's easy to relate. It's easy to relate to those practical effects because it's kind of like inhuman type gore going on, and if you're really young, like super young, I'm just gonna use this as an example, like don't take it to heart, a young child watching The Thing, but if you're very uninformed about that type of thing, the child would be like, oh, this is like a 1 out of 5, and this is like because the effects are stupid and it's not, they don't look as good as things now, right? But I will say, I'm not done yet, Zach. I'm not done yet. But with this movie, it's kind of the same type of aura, I would say, in that if you don't care about the thing's practical effects, you're really missing a lot of the core moments in the movie that make them so great. Outside, of course, the acting and the plot and things like that. In this, it's a very similar thing where if you don't care about the actual Navy stuff, then you're really missing out on a lot of what makes the movie great. And that is a purely opinion, is purely subjective. I'm not saying that anybody's wrong for not understanding that, but that is what the movie is trying to achieve, and that's what I rated it on.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, if we're talking about like how much the practical effects weigh in on my overall assessment of the movie, I mean, as far as The Thing goes, I can acknowledge that the practical effects are impressive, but I don't ever actually believe that. I mean, setting aside the fact that The Thing is a fictional creature, I never actually take what's going on in front of me as real. Whereas in some other films, I can accept like supernatural science fiction type things because they look so real. But in The Thing, I kind of know the entire time that it's not real just because of the nature of it being a practical effect. It doesn't look as real. So I think there's a way in which you can acknowledge that those effects are good, and even given the time and the setting that the film was made in, without necessarily criticizing the effects because they don't actually look real life in terms of how realistic they are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I don't want to take us down The Thing rabbit hole because I will defend that movie to my dying breath.
Well, I love The Thing.
But yes, I personally think the effects in that really hold up because they're like actually there on set. You can tell they're interacting with the actors. But a scene in this film that kind of involves a lot of the naval stuff that took me out of the rest of it, that I think that just occurred to me as actually being pretty good, is there's a sequence where a jet's coming in too fast or the hook is broken or something like that. Right. I'm not aware of all the terminology, and they've got to get out the net to catch it. I will say most of the naval scenes in this movie, with all the technical jargon and all the processes, and we're running out and we're going to do all the technical aspects, most of the scenes like that in this movie took me out of it. But that scene, I thought, actually did a good job of creating this tension of, oh, is this jet going to land properly? Is the net going to work? It really did create that tension and kind of drew me into the movie, which many other scenes did not do. So I'll give that scene some applause there.
Like the sexual comments during the refueling sequence.
Yes.
but that the thing is, once again, that's not, they didn't just include that just for the hell of it. That was like an actual realistic thing that happened, and I do agree it can take you out of the movie if you haven't already acknowledged that that's going to be a present thing for the entire time. But yeah, they're like talking about important plot points. The fact that you're just stuck just the day before the day of infamy, like the big invasion of the U.S. And then you see that happen, and you're like, what does that have anything to do with anything? And they're like, they're just showing off. They're just showing off the jets. I mean, whether it takes you out of the movie or not is entirely up to you. But just seeing there's going to be, they're thinking of like the supreme military people that are like, why didn't the jets refuel the entire time? They've been flying for like 19 hours and they fly,
Yeah.
like they get refueled. But I mean, it's just, like I said, the movie knows that's what it is, so it goes for it. It plows ahead without thinking about too much of the damage behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed. I mean, like Zach said, I think the plot and a lot of the ideas that they lay down are very, very interesting. And if they, and this is definitely probably a black mark on the historical accuracy note of things, but if they were to remake this movie where this entire movie was like the first 30 to 45 minutes of a actual time travel movie where like battles occur and things are resolved, then I would probably thoroughly enjoy that movie. Like there's a lot of really interesting ideas. It's just I feel like it's and like Mitchell's saying, it catering to a specific audience is fine, but I think that that gets even more confused when you try to make it a time travel popcorn movie, so to speak. And my definition of a popcorn movie, at least, is something that has less dialogue and thought attributed to it. Like I would call like a superhero movie a popcorn movie, where you just you go and you watch interesting battles and Batman speaks in a low voice and you have fun. And I don't know. I guess that might just be another difference in definition. But I mean, I like the ideas, so I don't totally hate it.
I do agree, and the reason why I agree is because a popcorn movie to you is very much like, basically it has to have action in it or something that is in and of itself fundamentally mind numbing. Like we don't have to think about what's happening. And in this, there are two major things that happen for 90% of the movie: dialogue and cool Navy stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the dialogue can be interesting at times, and it is, like I said, it's there's a lot of like, you can think about it a lot more or think about it a lot less, or just take it for what it is. And you can lose interest in that. Like I said, it depends on the audience member, but and the same thing with the Navy thing. I mean, the more you know about the Navy stuff, the cooler it's going to be, inevitably. Or like the more, or thinking about Star Wars, the more you know about, the background behind stuff, the easier it is to be interested in it. And I think there is some relation between historical background and kind of like, a built sci-fi universe, fictional background.
Yeah. I would
like I said, it's entirely subjective.
I would just say the way, Mitchell, that you're kind of describing the movie leads me to believe that you sort of interpret this as a film that's intended as more of a think piece that maybe had more popcorny stuff added to it to try to appeal to summer audience. And that just makes me think, well, if it's meant to be more of a think piece about the consequences of potentially altering Pearl Harbor, why does it need to be a big budget Hollywood movie? Like, I feel like if that's what you're trying to get from this film is cool naval stuff and a discussion on potentially changing the outcome of Pearl Harbor, why not just get two historical philosophers to have a debate and then play naval stock footage over it? Like, I feel like that would fulfill the purpose that you seem to be implying this movie was going for, without kind of trying to throw in these action beats that don't necessarily go anywhere, and the time travel narrative that ends up feeling kind of superfluous.
Yeah, I definitely, I can take that. I understand that, but I don't think they're trying to make it. I don't think they're trying to go for that. I don't think they're trying to destroy the box office and try to get every single person to go and see this, necessarily. I think that it went for what it was trying to go for. I don't think it was trying to take itself too seriously. This is like post Twilight Zone perspective of time travel, pre Back to the Future kind of perspective of time travel. So there's not really a super defined, best possible movie that regards time travel. I guess besides Star Wars, technically, but I guess there's no traveling in that, but I guess I shouldn't go down that rabbit hole.
Lightspeed skipping.
Lightspeed skipping. Yeah, right. No, I understand that, Zach, but I mean, I just don't see how they could have. I don't see how they could have made this movie any more than it actually was without going for a different purpose. I don't think it was trying to be anything more than it actually was. And I think when Martin Sheen's trying to explain to Kirk Douglas how everything should work and what's the best course of action, and then you have the other two naval officers. You have Owens and the executive officer Thurman just discussing different ways of how to approach it, and then the captain, who's the overarching authority on everything, decides what to do, and that's kind of like the formula they generally follow. And I think that's pretty much the deepest that the movie actually gets, and I think that's the deepest that the movie has to get philosophically. I don't think there's anything more that should be taken other than from what they say. That's kind of what I meant by like a popcorn film in terms of dialogue.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that the discussion that you're alluding to between, I can't remember any of the characters' names, but Kirk Douglas's character and Sheen's character and the two other guys. I found that conversation interesting, and this idea of ethics and what is more morally acceptable between stopping Pearl Harbor or saving the senator or altering the course of history for better or for worse, and how much of that can you actually control? What changes and whether the changes are good or bad, even if the thing that you are doing is good, if it leads to more bad in the future, then is that on your hands? I don't know. That's an interesting conversation, but like Zach said, it's tricky because it's really interesting for the minute where they're having that conversation, and then any sort of conclusion that any of them individually reach, even if they all disagree at that time, we never really get an idea of who was right or who was wrong, or how any of their versions of handling the events that they're presented would have gone, because we just go back to the beginning. So it's an interesting conversation, sure. I'll give it that. But I don't know if that conversation and the naval stuff merits a 90-minute movie if it doesn't get resolved, I guess.
Right. And the thing is that it's supposed to be more like the audience member decides. but then like I said, it does sound kind of contradictory when I say that, and it's also like you're not supposed to think about the dialogue too much, but it kind of it leaves seeds that you're supposed to care for, you're supposed to water and give sun to, you know what I mean? Sure. Like it's not something, it gives you things to think about, and that's it. And it doesn't leave you super satisfied at the end. It kind of gives you a little twist with Owens if you even cared about him, which he was an okay actor, by the way. I don't think he was solid. He pretty much did what he was supposed to, James Tarantino, but I think this is like his biggest film he's ever in.
Maybe, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have the dog recognize Laurel and stuff. I mean, that's nice. And like, it's like, hey, you finish the movie and that's it. Yeah. And it's like, it's not like something you overthink about the movie itself, but you think about the themes and the possibilities that it poses. And we have to think about it like that, especially in 1980, because representing time travel on screen is more of it's on the newer side of concepts than on the older side of concepts. It has been absolutely overdone a zillion times since then. So it's harder to look at it more critically from that time period.
Yeah. I think to make this version of the work of the movie work more for me, I think if Kirk Douglas had decided, okay, we're going to try to outrun the storm, and they'd actually tried to outrun it a little bit more, but it had caught up with them and pulled them back into the past, I think maybe this version of the movie would have worked a little bit more for me. It really bugged me that they tried to outmaneuver it once, and it followed them, and then Kirk Douglas decides, okay, we'll pack it in. I thought if he had tried to outrun it and failed, and then had been left with that, like, what could we have done if we had been able to outrun it, if the audience and the characters had been left with that question, I think it maybe would have had more of an impact on me. Because as it is, we're kind of left with that question, but the characters did sort of give up So it feels a little bit. It feels a bit more like the characters are kind of satisfied with the way things turned out, and we're not really left with those itching questions as much as maybe the filmmakers want us to be.
Right. Well, do any of you have any final thoughts?
I think if I were to rate a movie, on given the out of 5 actual rating in terms of my critical opinion of it, and a separate rating about the potential, I would give this movie a higher rating than The Changeling in the potential category. I think the conversations are interesting. I liked Laurel's character. I like the dog. I like what bits of combat and conflict that we see, but I was really, really frustrated and or bored for most of the movie because so little gets resolved. And like I said, just about Kirk Douglas earlier, I didn't feel like he was that good of a leader. He felt flustered by having civilians on his boat, and he doesn't really do a lot of constructive things, at least in my opinion. So I don't know. It just kind of felt like there were interesting conversations that don't get resolved, and interesting ideas that don't get explored enough for me. So 1 out of 5 for me.
I would say it's a movie with potential, as we mentioned a couple times. But I don't necessarily know if I would recommend it. If you're in the Navy or are thinking about joining the Navy or a big fan of naval and military history, you might get a kick out of it, out of seeing all the naval technology and strategy. But I think for somebody like me who's not as connected to those things, this movie will probably be quite frustrating because it presents a lot of interesting ideas and then doesn't do much with them. And as Christian implied earlier, I would say this would probably be decent ammunition for a modern remake. I think you could do a lot with this concept and with these questions to entertain a modern audience that the older film doesn't quite do.
I like Kirk Douglas, okay? I liked it. When I saw Passive Glory, that pretty much did it for me, for him. But I really, when I first saw this, I was kind of curious as to what was going on, and I liked the Navy stuff, and that was pretty much it. I wasn't really looking at it too critically. The past couple times after watching it with family and also having like certain discussions about it and having a good time trying to figure out what would we do in that situation. And like you both said, that's great potential, and especially what I think you both agree for a remake. I think I've seen a lot of reviews saying the same thing for today, and adding a lot of the taking care of a lot of the criticisms you guys post. But I'd say, as I've repeated already, I think that it is meant for very certain audiences. I would say if you like a lot of Navy stuff and a lot of Navy policy and procedures, and especially if you like the Nimitz, because the Nimitz is a great boat, then and you are generally fond of Kirk Douglas and Martin Sheen. Like if you've seen, I think it's The West Wing. Martin Sheen is known for that. And if you like, if you like Kirk Douglas and the Stanley Kubrick films, then those are great casting. And of course, I think for Catherine Ross, that's definitely an interesting cast for her. I haven't seen anything else she's been in, but I know she's been in a lot of things, and she's well known now. But yeah, I think the casting is pretty good. I guess it could have been better, but at the time, it was an ensemble cast. And if you like general sci-fi vibes mixed with a lot of military strategy and a lot of reliance on that, and you have general interest in kind of like the discussions that they talk about, like if you like that premise, I think that they approach that premise very well. If you like the premise that they are going back in the past, they have the potential to stop this huge invasion that's really important, and if you like that, then I think that they accomplish that very well. But beyond that, if you're expecting anything more, if you're expecting like a huge action sequence to follow, or if you don't mind a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the naval sequences, that take place, then I could recommend it to you. I wouldn't recommend you seeing it multiple times, but I think like once or twice, just so you could say that you've seen it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. There's a lot of things that I would enjoy that like 90% of people would not. But I tried not mentioning those things. And there's actually a lot of things in here that I did not like that they did incorrectly in that regard too. But yeah, it's a 1980 sci-fi movie that kind of feels low budget in some areas, and then it also has the Navy in it. So
Yeah.
that's the final countdown. Christian, would you like to introduce your sequence?
Is it time
It is time.
for the rundown?
The final rundown.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Final
not really.
rundown with a question mark?
No, we're far from done with this. But here's the premise. If for some reason you still don't know what this segment is, we get 1 minute, we throw a bunch of words at Zach, and he gives us a rating out of 5 for each phrase that we throw at him. So yeah, I'm going to set the timer for 60 seconds, and I'm going to ask Mitchell to start. And
Okay.
Are you ready, Mitchell?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, go.
80s men hitting on 40s women.
2 out of 5.
Einstein proving that time travel is possible in theory.
4 out of 5.
Planes.
3 out of 5.
Discussing what the audience already knows for 10 minutes.
2 out of 5.
Screaming time storms.
3 out of 5.
Big band jazz music on the airwaves.
3 out of 5.
Getting knocked out with a helmet on.
2 out of 5.
1, 2, 3 Mae Wests.
2 out of 5.
Sexy refueling sequence.
2 out of 5.
The dog surviving.
3 out of 5.
40s men disrespecting 40s women.
2 out of 5.
Captains on the bridge.
3 out of 5.
Captains off the bridge.
2 out of 5.
Catherine Ross as Laurel Scott.
3 out of 5.
Standing around in a blue bathrobe.
2 out of 5.
Yellen preventing Chapman from moving the plot forward.
2 out of 5.
1 second.
Old people makeup.
Time.
2 out of 5.
Time.
Yes.
Okay,
Wow.
we did
We
it.
just scraped it in there.
We did the thingy thing. All right, boyos.
That's the rundown.
It is.
I'm gonna thank you guys for watching this. I didn't know exactly what you guys were gonna think of it. But I'm glad that I let you I didn't try to guide you in any one direction. I kind of just wanted to see, you know, I haven't really gotten like a general opinion from normal people, except you two are not normal at all. But you know, you get what you get, and don't get upset. So, but yeah, I appreciate your guys' opinions on it, and the Army's better than Navy, so Army beat Navy.
All right.
This is
Shall I
Ben.
introduce?
Cookie Pocket. Now, Zach, go.
Yes, okay, alrighty. So since Christian got his back-to-back Star Wars episodes, he's still serving his time.
Yes.
And he's taking a week off, or an episode off, rather,
Couple.
from his selection. So I am choosing our film for next episode. And next time we're going to be talking about The Abominable Dr. Phibes, which is a comedy horror detective film from the early 70s starring Vincent Price. It's a very odd little picture, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about
I'm gonna
it.
love or hate this.
Particularly Christian 1 out of 5 over here.
Oh, jeez. I don't like
Just
this
kidding.
reputation. I like movies.
No.
Oh, God.
Okay, now this has been Cookie Pocket,
Mm-hmm.
an attempt at a podcast.
Yep.
I will see you all on Friday.
Aye aye.